Hello and welcome to another rambling review. We're taking a look at episode 2 of Infinity Train. This one is called something. I had the title up in front of me, but I seem to have lost it. There we go. The Iceberg Car. The previous episode, which is the title I just didn't get a chance to mention, was The Twin Tapes, which makes sense. Obviously, not being set in a car, it couldn't have been called The Something Car like the other episodes. But that title fits really well, because presumably it's two tapes, but they're linked somehow, sort of making them twins in terms of their origin. Yeah, like two people born together are twins. So if they came onto the train together and their tape was created somehow together, linking them that way, you'd consider them twin tapes. So that makes perfect sense. So we're looking at episode 2, the Iceberg Car, which, by the way, incorrectly titled, in my opinion. It's not. I guess it would give the game away to say what it actually is. But yeah, anyway, it's a tricky one, this one, isn't it? The second episode, because they've written themselves into an unusual position. Because basically, with a premise like this, at a certain point, you don't want to keep having to explain to your characters something the audience already knows. Realistically, the audience know what the train is and what it does, and that it's a train. It's that Doctor Who thing, isn't it? The companion always is having to be surprised by the Doctor, and it's bigger on the inside. What? Like, you have to go through that rigmarole every time, and it can be quite tiring for the audience, because the audience, they know, right? And in a show with 10-minute episodes, it's really tricky, because you don't want to, like, realistically, yes, these people would have a huge number of questions. They would be very confused. The situation is deeply confusing. It's not, it's not clear what's happening. So while they should be asking those questions, and that makes perfect sense, if you can find a way to avoid doing that on screen, that's better, because again, it can get quite tiring for the audience seeing the characters realize the same thing over and over again as the seasons go on. They got around it. They found a really clever way around it with previous seasons by having 1-1 post being sort of restored as conductor, had those tapes. So when Jesse first shows up, he knows roughly the deal about that he's on a train and how and why. And we also meet him a little bit later in his journey anyway. But even if we hadn't, even if we'd met him much earlier in his journey, he'd have still had that rough information from the video he got from 1-1. So when we went back, I kind of thought, like, maybe original conductor 1-1, not broken 1-1, had like much more boring and practical versions of these introductory tapes that were these introductory videos that were destroyed during Amelia's reign, and therefore had to be recreated with more sort of chaotic 1-1 at a later time. The reason I was hoping they would do that is so we wouldn't have to do this, which is an episode that has to have it's a fun idea, but it has to be a really thin idea, because the episode has to also essentially be let's get the characters familiar with the train and what's happening on the train. And that's just not very interesting for a viewer at this point. Because we know. We know why they're on the train. We know. So, and yes, the characters need to find that out, but wouldn't it have been easier just to have them watch, like, to start this up with them sort of waking up, or show them having just woken up, watching the end of the video, and then Kez appears? I don't know. There might have been an easier way to do this, and then to get sort of more straight into it. But the basic premise of this episode, for anyone who doesn't remember, is that they wake up, they're in the what is mislabeled or mistitled, the Iceberg Car, and basically Kez thinks she's... Well, no, Kez introduces herself and then sort of is like, oh, God, you guys are brand new. I've never really done this explaining thing before. All right, let me try and explain what your circumstances are. She does it, but badly. They're still confused. But then they get sort of chased because they've annoyed the denizens of this particular car. And then it turns out it's because she made... she thinks it's because she made the place cold, because it didn't used to be all icy and now it is. They find the thermostat she adjusted and they swing it and it goes hot, and then but the beings that are chasing them, the denizens, look different. And what they soon figure out is that they're actually moving the car forward through time, and it's shifting the DNA of those denizens every time they do it, and making them different based on like how far in the future or how far in the past they've gone. They're either de-evolving or evolving, and they keep turning into different sorts of creatures. And it's they're always wearing the same parkas, which they were wearing in the initial thing, which leads to one of my favorite jokes from the maybe the show, which is when they finally get back into their original states, which is not in a cold. It's not a cold place; it's just like a city. They say like, well, "Oh, so you weren't just running the parkas because it was originally an Iceberg Car?" And she was like, "No, we were going skiing." You know, they ask why we were wearing the parkas in that case if they weren't part of it being a cold car, and it was just related to the fact they were going skiing, which I thought was hilarious. I thought it was such a fun joke. But yeah, so Ryan and Min fight over the dial, and eventually they accidentally get it landing on back in the original time, and they get out of the car. It's fine. It's a fun idea. It's thin, but that's intentional, so that around that we can have lots of them fighting, although in a really sort of shallow way, which I didn't really get on with, because it was just like, can we learn something new now about their circumstances? This is the same discussion. We know there's more to this, and this is, I guess, the other problem you have with having characters in the train that know each other from before, is they're not. It seems unrealistic they wouldn't be having at this point the discussion of whatever the actual problem is, whatever really sort of set off the sequence of events that led to them sort of separating and becoming less drifting over time. I know the idea is they haven't dealt with it yet and that they're kind of ignoring it at this point, but I just feel like when you're having a fight in a situation like this, there might be something might come out that was a bit more specific, Ryan. Doesn't responds sarcastically when Mingi, I know I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna try and I'll keep calling him Min, because I saw after the first one I was like, I called him Min a lot. That's fine, right? Like shortening Daniel to Dan. But there's a part of me that was just like, I can't remember if they've done that in the show or if I've done that. It'll be easier for me to not be self-conscious about mispronouncing it though if I just stick with Min, so I may just stick with Min. But he sort of like gets easy. He talks about that he might miss like the start of uni, and Ryan's all like rolling his eyes and stuff, and it's like I don't know. It's just sort of the same stuff we already know. There's nothing new to it, the dynamic in this, and I feel like by the time we had the second episode with Jesse, which was I think the third episode of that series, we started to learn more detail about Jesse's past and his the way he folds to like social pressures and stuff, and I just feel like with this being their second episode, now is maybe the time to start dropping hints. I don't need like the answers now, but just something beyond what we got in the previous episode, like explore the dynamic or expand the dynamic a little bit more, rather than, because the scope of it is very much the same here. They're still just peeved at each other, and for sort of vague reasons related to having different sort of approaches to their life decisions. I don't know. Again, I'm not judging that as a situation, because the fact we don't know is intentional. It's designed so that we're going to learn as we go on the exact nature. I'm not criticizing the show for not characterizing them. I want to make it clear that what I'm sort of criticizing is that in this episode, they don't really expand the scope of their disagreement or dynamic in any way that's new to me. So it's kind of, you almost think, what's other than getting them to a place where they understand that they're on a train and that they've got to get their numbers down, and that it's a bit weird that they're on together. Like with the exception of sort of setting all that up, this episode really doesn't do anything else. And I think I'd be less annoyed at that if it at least got some new character stuff to me as a viewer. I don't feel I'd feel the weight of all the repetitive, we're on a train, moments, things like that, if I was getting something more from it. So I don't know if I feel like I've come overall critical, and it's a fun episode. Like the actual There's plenty of great jokes. Kez is a sort of delight at this point. I feel like Kez is walking a fine line though, where Kez could become quite annoying. But I kind of like Kez is almost belligerent. Like she's unusually in the know and happy to answer questions for a denizen, but she's also completely uninterested in any of it. Like, so she sort of answers questions, but in this really hilariously casual and vague way. Right now, I find that quite endearing, but I feel like there's a real risk. If you lean on that too hard, I could find Kez quite annoying quite quickly. But at present, really enjoying Kez. I thought she was a good source of humor. She was a good... she's a good match for these two specifically. I feel like you have someone too earnest like Atticus, and it's a bit much because you've got these two characters that are sort of at each other's throats a bit. You need a character that doesn't take it too seriously or themselves too seriously to match these two, I think. Like the moment where she's like, oh, what are the odds that you two would come on together and you're both already mortal enemies? And they're like, we're not mortal enemies, we're friends. Like, that's funny, and that's a really nice moment. And it also shows, again, it's demonstrating Kez's almost lack of caring to any of this. Like she's mildly interested, but like in the end she doesn't seem to care much about any of it. She's just a bit, I'm going to have to be the one to explain this, I guess. And then when they come out and they're like, we're on a train, she's like, yeah, I already told you that. They're like, no, you didn't. Because she told them basically nothing. She described it as them getting in a pocket. This episode does have some really good dialogue, though. One of my favourite exchanges is when she gets all sort of exasperated trying to explain it to them. She's almost an audience facsimile here, actually, because she's exasperated at having to explain it to them, and that is almost how I felt hearing it. So maybe that's what they were going for. Maybe they thought they could get away with doing it by just having her be tired of having to explain it to people who don't understand, and that would sort of like the audience would find that funny, and that would be therefore a way to do it without making it feel like you're doing it. But it doesn't quite, I don't think it quite comes together in the way they were maybe hoping. But she literally at one point is like, sort of says to them, like sort of passively, just like, oh yeah, you get your numbers down to leave the train. You've got to learn some lessons, because you were screwing up your lives in junk. And she just sort of phrases it that way, and it's just such a great way to introduce us to a character, if I'm honest. And because the dialogue really does sell her personality very quickly. And that's super funny, and it's a great joke, and it's a good line. But then but that works both ways. Like Min and Mingi and Ryan both have really good exchanges in this episode too. So when Min's like, "You bought the tickets," and Ryan's like, "For a normal train. I didn't go into the metro station and say 2 tickets for the Wormhole Judgment Train." Wormhole Judgment Train is a fucking great line. Excuse my language. I know some younger people listen to this, but that's a brilliant line. Like, I really loved that. It's just, yeah. And I also really enjoyed, again, Kez is like absolutely honest at all times and like completely brutal with them when they're like, well, see, we worked together and got out of that situation. And she even points it out. Again, the dialogue of this episode is like its best strength by far. When she's like, you didn't really figure it out so much as fight over it until it randomly fell into place. And that is another really good line. So this episode is slightly flawed in that we don't learn anything new about the characters, which is a shame. We spend a lot of time just getting Mingi and Ryan caught up, and that is unfortunate. The kind of the adventure that goes alongside that, I think, is fine and fun. And again, the strength really is the jokes and the dialogue. The payoff to the dial and so there's two, right. So the other thing I loved that kept me entertained through this is, so yeah, I think ultimately I do think actually I have a. While this episode is deeply flawed, there is still entertainment value in it from just the jokes and the dialogue alone. The other thing that made me crack up was the the vending machine gum running gag. I thought that was brilliant. Like, she's like, so she says originally that the reason she turned to the dial is because she thought it was a vending machine. And you're looking at this dial going, she's as balmy as one is. Like, that's insane. And then it's a bit of a double switch, because later on, when they actually get it back to how it was supposed to be, it genuinely does look like a vending machine. And then there's this thing where she wanted gum, and Ryan's like, can you chew gum? Because, oh yeah, I haven't really clarified it, but Kez is a floating bell. I guess we'll find out more about what her deal is when we get to, because the end of the episode sort of sets up that their journey is they're going to head to her car to quote-unquote chill. The way the train sets itself up is the denizens feel inherently compelled to help the passengers, right? So, maybe that's why she's doing that. And maybe that's exactly what Ryan and Min need. Maybe they need someone a bit more relaxed to sort of like, maybe they help them learn to have fun and maybe not take everything so seriously. Maybe that's where it's going. Because she literally is like, yeah, do you want to come back to mine and we'll chill? And like, that is the premise. That is the thrust going forward, is going to be they're just traveling through. But there's the other gag about the gum where she's a bell. Ryan's like, can you even chew gum? She's like, well, I'm not likely to find out now. And then when they're being chased later and they turn the dial really far up, the denizens that are chasing them become these like all-knowing beings, and think she can ask them a question. So she asks them, can I chew gum? And when they say yes, she asks what flavor, and then she seems kind of disappointed by the answer. So yeah, I think there is a lot of redeeming stuff in this episode, but it is, again, it's comedy, it's silliness. I do think the premise of the car in question is reasonably creative. I also quite actually like the fact that the problem just sort of gets solved by accident, because if it got solved by them working together this time, there's nowhere for them to go. Like, you have to solve the problem, and I don't mind, for the sake of time, them just sort of making, especially because they kind of they put a hat on it, because Kez points it out, and it's actually like, yeah, you guys didn't achieve anything here. This was a random sequence of events. And I think there's a version of this episode where that bothers me, I think. There's a version of this episode where I do this review afterwards, and I say, oh, pointing out that it just sort of solved itself doesn't make that any better from a storytelling perspective. But because that plot was so intentionally thin anyway, and it was clearly just an excuse to get them, sort of running about and discovering the situation they're in, I didn't really mind. I think if the episode had been more heavily, like, scenario based, and if it had been more about them getting out of the car, I don't know, like, it was entirely about that, but the actual, in terms of the plot, but in terms of what was actually physically happening, it was mostly used, as I said, to sort of have the characters demonstrate their disdain for each other, introduce Kaz, and get Ryan and Min caught up into their situation. So as a result, the actual circumstances of this episode, the plot felt thin and kind of almost secondary, and that's why I think I don't mind that the answer was a little bit cheap, because one, it gives the characters somewhere to go. If they're already working together and fixing stuff, then solving problems, then there's not less room for them to grow. But two, it wasn't as primary an element of this episode. So yeah, it kind of got away with it. Did we also get a hint to Kez has a roommate called Morgan? I'm fascinated to see who and or what Morgan is. That's exciting. Again, just thrown out casually. Yeah, we'll see my roommate Morgan. Like, I'm currently really digging Kez and just apathy. It's really weirdly refreshing for this show. I wouldn't have expected that. If you described Kez to me prior to me watching these episodes, I don't think I'd have agreed with that being a good idea. But the execution is pretty perfect. She's a great character. So yeah, the vague thrust for the time being is we're just gonna keep traveling through the train. I did think the moment where the three denizens chased after Kez and Ryan and Min had already moved on, and she like spanned the dial, was weirdly cruel. And I'm wondering if she's gonna turn out to be maybe an antagonist. Is that a first hint at her being a bit? It did cross my mind. I'm not suggesting this is a theory, but one thought that crossed my mind is I wasn't sure. Was the intention of that scene? Oh, it's funny. they go chasing after her, so she just whacks the dial again to scramble their DNA, one more time, and then runs away just to stop them from chasing? Or was I supposed to think, that's a little menacing that she did that, a little cruel, a little unnecessary. She could just flown out the door. This whole thing of you following us, denizens don't tend to do that. Have we had an example of that before? The only time I know denizens to travel through the train is either the Mirror Police, who are chasing Lake, or that's well, yeah, I suppose denizens that buddy up with passengers, but otherwise they tend to stay in their own cars, don't they? So the odds of I feel like when you shut those doors, I wouldn't have questioned that those guys were following, but I guess denizens do often. Yeah, we do occasionally come across denizens in other cars. Like there in the Lucky Cat car last year, there were several denizens from different different cars that we'd already seen traveling to that. So I guess they do. So I guess there's nothing to say they wouldn't have just chased them. I don't know. Basically, I had a moment of thought there where I wondered if they were trying to hint maybe that she's a little bit of a darker character than we realise at first. Maybe a little bit more morally grey. Yeah, kind of a question mark on that at this point. A little bit like the cat, maybe. Speaking of, I'm trying to figure out how I feel like the character like the cat might fit into this. The sad thing here, and I will have to see how it plays out, is when Tulip met the cat, it seemed like that was the same day the cat was very first meeting Randall, and they've developed a relationship since. So I'm starting to worry we might not see Randall this year, or no, we should still see Randall. They're not going to. Randall's been every other season. They'll fit him in, but he'll just have to be separate to the cat, I guess. Because if they do have the cat in this, I'll be interested in seeing the cat this long ago, before she sort of softened a bit after her adventures with Tulip, with maybe a more conniving version of the cat pre-Amelia. In fact, God, we don't actually know what the cat situation was pre-Amelia at all. We have no idea. So yeah, I'm kind of excited that they might bring in the cat. We might get to see how she was, but she won't be with Randall. I guess we'll have to meet Randall separately. But is Randall's sort of infected almost the whole train at this point as well? That's the other thing, because it feels to me like Randall just keeps spreading through the train in different weird ways. So I don't know. You can't not have Randall though, so he's going to be in it at some point. I should, before I go, talk about the ending, because obviously the ending hinted at the next episode, which I think is called, what is it, the Old West Car. And they walk through the door like, is there danger in every car? Then Kez is like, no, most of the denizens are chill. And then they step into this Old West car, and there's like a grasshopper and a mantis pointing guns at them. I'd have to look again to make sure it's actually, because weird looking guns that might spray bug spray, actually, looking at them. Oh, that might be the joke they do in the next episode, that someone pulls the trigger on one of those guns and it just mist that doesn't bother Min or Ryan at all, because they're not bugs. Because they look like they've got canisters on them rather than they shoot bullets. Oh, I hope that's true. That's funny if that's the case. Yeah, they look like aerosols almost, with like little dials. Oh, that's fun. I hope that's what it is. But then the sheriff shows up, whose voice I immediately recognized, but was like, it's like recognizable, but it's different. And then I looked into it, and the sheriff it's Margot Martindale, character actress Margot Martindale, for those who watch BoJack Horseman, and putting on sort of like a gruff voice. I found her in the credits and was like, my mind was melted. The credits did also give away that character, even though you don't see the full design in this episode, is a caterpillar. So yeah, I'm very in for whatever that madness is. It just looks ridiculous. A caterpillar sheriff, grasshopper, and a mantis for sheriffs. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm just easily impressed, but yeah, very on board with that. Yeah, I haven't mentioned the cast yet. Everyone's been amazing so far. Minty Lewis, who voices Kez, has been sort of the standout for me, but she's had the most to do to be honest, thus far, in terms of like so that's not the most to do, but the most she's been given all like the funniest lines, or the lines that have the most potential for exploring the possibilities of how to deliver them. Whereas Johnny Young and Sakai Murashige? Murashige? I'm going to go with Murashige. Have both done a wonderful job as Min and Ryan are bringing Mingy and Ryan to life. But I think the reason that Minty Lewis has stood out as Kez so far is quite simply she's had the funnest stuff to deliver. They're having to do a lot of like character work and build, you know, these people and hint at their past without giving away too much, and like being very clear about how they live. So they're kind of, their hands are a little bit tied in terms of the sort of range of fun things they can sort of do with their performance at this point. They're kind of locked in with the story, whereas I feel like Kez is a bit more of a character that a voice actor can like just have fun with and do some inherently silly things with, and the deliveries in this are the comic timing's great, and yeah, again, I love the way that character's being written and performed. But yeah, I think all the voice actors have done a really good job so far. I just feel like the Kez is standing out for that reason at the moment. But yeah, as always, pumped for the next one. I don't know if I'll record that today because I've already done 2 of these, and maybe you feel it, but I definitely feel my energy waning. But yeah, it was a flawed episode, as I pointed out, as I started with. But now it's out the way. Were there better ways to do it? Yeah, probably. But it's out the way now. We can get on with it. 8 episodes left. Let's have some fun. Let's have some train-based fun. And I mean, a caterpillar sheriff. That's got to be. that's pretty good. I'm on board with that, basically. Yeah, so thanks very much for listening, as always, and we'll see you guys on the next episode, which let me get the title for. Oh yeah, it's the Old West Car. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time when I discuss the Old West Car.